There was a time when Rome, the steel heart of an empire, felt fear. Armies that once marched across continents suddenly hesitated. Generals who conquered kingdoms whispered in private, mothers clutched their children, and senators prayed quietly that the shadow looming over Rome would somehow pass. Because beyond the mountains, beyond the seas, and beyond the edges of Roman pride, a name was rising. A commander who thought differently, who fought differently, who terrified Rome unlike anyone before. History would remember him not as a hero or villain, but as the nightmare that Rome could never forget. Call to action. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe, and write in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps the channel, and I love seeing our community from all around the world. Long before Rome became an unstoppable empire, it was still learning how fragile power can be. The Mediterranean glittered with rival states, rising powers, hungry kings, and one city in particular across the sea in North Africa watched Rome carefully. Carthage. A titan of trade, a master of ships, a civilization built on wealth, cunning, and ambition. Rome and Carthage had already clashed once, a brutal conflict known as the First Punic War. Rome had won, barely, carving victory out of desperation. But Carthage did not forget humiliation. And within its walls, a boy was growing up who would devote his life to revenge. His name, Hannibal Barca. Raised among soldiers, he learned strategy before he learned letters. His father took him to an altar, placed his tiny hands upon it, and made him swear, never be a friend of Rome. That promise would shake the ancient world. Years later, as Rome grew richer and prouder, Hannibal seized command of the Carthaginian army. But he did not want just another war. He wanted to break Rome psychologically. He understood something vital. Rome believed it was invincible. So Hannibal would do the impossible. He marched his army across rivers, hostile lands, and finally, the towering frozen Alps. War elephants slipped and fell on cliffs, soldiers froze to death, and yet Hannibal pressed forward, step by brutal step. When survivors emerged on the Italian side, Rome stared in disbelief. The enemy had arrived, not at their borders, but inside Italy itself. Panic spread, farmers fled. Messages raced to the Senate. Commanders argued. Rome had never faced a general like this. A commander who moved like smoke, unpredictable, fast, and merciless. Hannibal struck at Trebia, at Lake Trasimene, battles where Roman legions were swallowed, ambushed, and annihilated. The myth of Roman invincibility shattered, and yet Rome refused to surrender, because this was more than war. It was a duel between wills, Rome's pride versus Hannibal's oath, and the world was about to witness one of the greatest battles in human history. The year was 216 BCE. The fields near a dusty village called Cannae would soon become soaked in Roman blood. Rome gathered a colossal army, perhaps the largest it had ever assembled, determined to crush Hannibal once and for all. 80,000 Roman soldiers marched confidently. Senators accompanied the army, ready to celebrate victory. Rome believed sheer numbers would solve their problem. Hannibal smiled. He knew Rome's strength could become its weakness. As the sun rose, dust whipped across the battlefield. Hannibal arranged his troops in a strange crescent formation, thinner at the center, stronger on the sides. To the Romans, it looked like weakness, so they charged. The Roman legions pushed forward, pressing Hannibal's center backward, believing they were winning. Step by step, the Carthaginian middle retreated, deliberately, drawing the Romans deeper, tighter, more crowded. Then the trap snapped shut. Hannibal's elite troops on the wings swung inward, curving around like a closing jaw. Cavalry smashed into Roman flanks. Panic erupted. The army found itself trapped, pressed so tightly soldiers couldn't even lift their swords. What followed was slaughter. Hour after hour, legionnaires collapsed, commanders fell, banners disappeared. By sunset, Rome's greatest army had been erased. It was one of the most devastating defeats in military history. Word reached the city, doors slammed shut. Priests begged the gods for help. Children asked their parents, "Is Rome going to die?" But Rome did something extraordinary. It did not surrender, instead it transformed. It learned, it endured. And slowly, a new generation of commanders would rise, men who studied Hannibal not with fear, but with respect. The struggle had only begun. Rome realized brute force would not defeat Hannibal. They changed tactics. They avoided big battles. They starved his supplies. They shadowed him, harassing rather than confronting. Hannibal, once unstoppable, now found himself isolated. Meanwhile, across the sea, a young Roman general was rising, Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus. Calm, brilliant, patient. He studied Hannibal's wars like a book and traveled to Africa to force Carthage to recall its greatest general home. Two legends were about to meet. In the plains near Zama, Scipio and Hannibal faced one another at last. Their meeting before the battle was quiet, respectful, almost tragic. Both men understood the meaning of what was about to happen. Elephants charged, legions advanced, cavalry thundered, but Scipio had prepared carefully. He created lanes for the elephants to pass harmlessly through, then counterattacked with discipline Rome had never previously shown. The tide turned. Hannibal fought like a lion, but Carthage broke. The man who once haunted Rome now watched his dream fade. Rome won, Carthage was humbled. But Rome never truly forgot Hannibal. For decades afterward, Roman mothers warned their children, "Behave, or Hannibal will come." He became legend. A symbol of strategy, courage, and the terrifying reminder that even the strongest empires can bleed. And that is why history calls him the terror that haunted Rome. Hannibal's victories shook Rome, but they also transformed it. The Romans began to understand something powerful. Strength is not only in the sword, it is in patience. They stopped charging blindly. They refused large, open battles. They allowed Hannibal to wander while slowly strangling him of resources. Roman legions shadowed him from a distance, burning fields, blocking supply roads, fortifying towns. Hannibal could still win skirmishes, but he could no longer crush Rome the way he had at Cannae. His soldiers were far from home. Carthage sent little support. Allies he once relied on grew hesitant. Years passed, and Hannibal, once the hunter, began to feel like the hunted. Meanwhile, across Rome, a new kind of commander was rising. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio. He was young. He had seen the horrors of Cannae as a teenager. Instead of breaking, he learned. He asked questions other generals never dared to ask. How does Hannibal think? What does he expect us to do? How do we become flexible, like him? Scipio understood Rome could not beat Hannibal by copying old traditions. Rome needed to evolve, and slowly, Rome gave him command. But instead of marching after Hannibal inside Italy, Scipio did something bold and shocking. He sailed to Spain, then to North Africa, striking at the very heart of Carthage. Suddenly, Carthage panicked. Their farms burned. Their allies trembled. Their cities faced Roman legions at their gates. And the Carthaginian Senate made a desperate decision. They sent a message across the sea. They called Hannibal home. For the first time in years, Hannibal looked back toward Carthage, the city he had sworn to defend, the city that had once cheered his victories, now begging for rescue. He understood what it meant. The real final confrontation was approaching. Two minds, two worlds, two legends shaped by the same war. Scipio, the student of Rome's defeats. Hannibal, the man who had written those defeats into history. When Hannibal set foot back on African soil, he knew something deep inside. The war had changed. He was no longer the unstoppable storm. He was returning to defend a wounded homeland. Before the armies clashed, Hannibal and Scipio met face to face, two of the greatest commanders in history, standing together in silence for a moment, men forged by war, bound by fate. Some sources say Hannibal spoke first. "Let us make peace and before we destroy everything." But peace was impossible now. Too many lives lost. Too much pride on both sides. War would decide. And the world waited, because what was coming would not just determine the fate of Carthage. It would determine the future of the Mediterranean, and the empire Rome would become. The plains outside the city of Zama were quiet and too quiet. Wind rolled across the African earth. Dust swirled. Banners snapped in the hot sun. On one side stood the disciplined legions of Rome, shaped and hardened by years of defeat and transformation. On the other, the veterans of countless campaigns, men who had followed Hannibal across mountains, rivers, and nightmares. They had survived the Alps. They had watched Rome bleed. And now they stood ready one last time. Before the armies clashed, something extraordinary happened. Hannibal and Scipio met alone, two generals with no weapons drawn. There was no shouting, no arrogance, only the weight of history pressing on both of them. Hannibal, older now, eyes carved by experience, spoke with calm honesty. He remembered victories, he remembered Cannae, And he also remembered how quickly fortune can turn. He warned Scipio, war is a dangerous master. Sometimes even the winner loses everything. He suggested peace, mercy, a way out. But Scipio had seen Rome suffer. He had promised his people safety, not compromise. He believed Rome could not live with Carthage as an equal threat. The time for talk had passed. They parted, not as enemies filled with hate, but as commanders who understood that destiny, not pride, would decide. Then came the silence before chaos. Hannibal placed his elephants at the front. Massive beasts, armored, frightening, living battering rams designed to break Roman lines and crush morale. Behind them, infantry formed ranks. His cavalry waited on the wings, ready to strike. Scipio did something unexpected. He didn't panic. He ordered his soldiers to form lanes, open corridors within the legion formations. When the elephants charged, trumpets blared and Roman soldiers shouted, confusing the animals. Many of them panicked. Instead of smashing the legions, they ran harmlessly through the lanes or turned back into Hannibal's own lines. It was the first sign Rome had learned. Then the real fighting began. Steel clashed, shields shattered. Dust filled the air so thick soldiers could barely see. The front lines pushed, fell back, surged forward again. Veterans who had once watched Romans die now realized they were facing a new Rome, disciplined, patient, terrifyingly organized. The cavalry battle erupted on the flanks. Scipio's allies from Numidia, expert horsemen, chased Hannibal's cavalry off the field. For a moment, the center still held. Hannibal's veterans fought like men, refusing to surrender history itself. But slowly, inevitably, Rome closed in. The Numidian cavalry returned from the rear. The legions advanced from the front. Hannibal found himself in the same nightmare he had once delivered to Rome at Cannae, trapped between jaws of iron. There was no miracle left, no surprise move. No mountain pass to cross, just the end of a dream. Carthage broke, men fled. Commanders vanished in the storm. The Carthaginian army, once feared across continents, collapsed under Roman discipline. And Hannibal watched, not with rage, not with tears, but with the understanding of a man who had given everything and seen fate choose another. The terror that had once haunted Rome was finally defeated. But history was not done with Hannibal yet. Even in defeat, Rome would still whisper his name with fear, and Carthage would soon learn the true price of losing to an empire that never forgets. When the dust settled at Zama, silence fell over Africa. Rome had won, but victory was never gentle. Carthage, once a mighty trading empire, now stood humbled. War reparations. Loss of territory. No army, no power, no pride. And somewhere within those broken walls walked a man who had once shaken Rome to its core. Hannibal Barca. He was no longer the unstoppable storm. He was a hunted statesman trying to rebuild what was left of his city. Rome, however, could not rest easily knowing he still breathed. To them, Hannibal wasn't just a man, he was a ghost. A reminder that even the greatest power on earth could nearly fall. Roman politicians whispered his name in the Senate. Watch him. Track him. Do not let him rise again, Hannibal understood. He had lived his entire life studying power. He could feel Rome's fear pressing against him. And so, rather than be handed over to his enemies, he disappeared into the wider world. He served as an advisor to kings. He trained armies far from Rome. Everywhere he went, rulers listened, because wherever Hannibal walked, history followed. But Rome always hunted. Step by step, city by city, they closed in. The man who once crossed the Alps with elephants now had to cross borders secretly, slipping through shadows instead of leading legions. And when capture finally seemed inevitable, Hannibal made his last decision. He would not be paraded through Rome in chains. He left behind a simple message, quiet, bitter, philosophical. Let us free Rome from its long anxiety, since they think it takes too much time to wait for an old man's death. With that, the life of Hannibal Barca ended. But his legend did not. Rome had destroyed Carthage's power, yet deep inside the Roman mind, a scar remained. Generations later, senators would still stand in marble halls and warn each other, Hannibal could come again. Someone like him always can. Mothers frightened their children with his name. Commanders studied his tactics for centuries. Even Rome's greatest generals, including Scipio himself, admitted Hannibal was one of the finest military minds the world had ever seen. Because Hannibal did something rare. He proved that empires are not invincible. He proved that courage, innovation, and relentless strategy could shake giants. He proved that fear can be more powerful than armies. And in the end, history remembered both men. Scipio, the strategist who saved Rome and forged its future empire. Hannibal, the nightmare who forced Rome to evolve, to become stronger, harder, more ruthless. Without Hannibal, Rome might never have become Rome. Centuries later, historians still ask, was he a villain? A hero, a tragic genius crushed by fate? Perhaps he was something greater, a reminder. A reminder that power is fragile, that ambition burns both the world and the man who carries it, and that somewhere beyond every strong empire there may be another Hannibal waiting, studying, preparing, dreaming. And that is why he remains, the terror that haunted Rome. And don't forget, write a comment telling where you're watching from. I'd love to see.